Friends, let's go ahead and get things going this morning. There is so much going on in the life of the church today that between the new members and the session being down there and folks being downstairs to say goodbye to TJ, and there's probably some other things. One of my great challenges this morning was figuring out which bow tie to wear. Did I wear one of the multiple expressions of tartan, which is what I ultimately did, or would I wear my baseball bow tie in honor of the World Series? To which Amy said, well, you could wear that next week. I'm like, baby, the World Series may be over next week if we're lucky, but I won't go there. We are so grateful to have Carol with us again today, helping us get ready for next Sunday, which is All Saints Sunday next Sunday, as we think about some of the saints of the church. I walked in, you can't do it unless you have a key, but I walked in the door between the sanctuary and the chapel, which I can master with a key. And I paused before I came in and looked over the names of the folks on the plaque out there. A couple of years ago, I was, as is my custom, having greeted folks coming to the early service and then walking to do work during the early service. And as I was doing that, the three Blue Boys were standing looking at the plaques that are affixed to the sanctuary wall by the original columbarium. And I paused and I started running down the names and telling those boys who those folks were. And when I came, only maybe there were possibly 10 names on that first plaque. And now there are three plaques. And I am so incredibly grateful that we have a columbarium. So the saints are here with us. Bill Bryant's family have asked Donovan and I to do the interment service for Bill next Saturday, which will be a private family event out at, you'll be glad to know, Carol, Mount Olivet Cemetery. And oh gosh, I'm sorry I'm taking up your time, but I asked Bill one time, how did a boy from Alabama go to Princeton Theological Seminary in the 60s? And he said, my grandfather was the pastor at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Atlanta for 30 years. Covenant is on Peachtree, just below St. Philip's, if you know, but it was a UP church. And in 1960, his grandfather was elected moderator of the Northern Presbyterian Church as a pastor from Atlanta. So really, this sense of history of who some of these saints are that we don't really understand. So, Carol, thank you.
Glad to be here. Let us begin with prayer. God of us all, these assembled in the great cloud of witnesses and those gathered on earth, today we remind ourselves of those who have gone before us in this congregation and in Nashville, and may we follow in their footsteps and take up the places where they have left off. Amen. Now, I don't know about you, but there are two things that take place here at Westminster that are more emotional for me than anything else we do here. And one of them is taking communion by intinction, because it really is very moving to me, because as I'm sitting in the pew and watching these people go down the aisle, I start going back in my memory of all the people I know in this congregation. Ray and I have been members for 50 years and who have died, and I can see them walking down that aisle taking communion, and it really awakens my imagination and gratitude for these people who have been here for so long and we're still able to take communion. Another thing that really moves me is what's going to happen next Sunday when we read the names of all of our members who have died in the past 12 months, and we then ring the bell in the steeple for that. And I find that also to be very moving when they go down the names of the list. And, you know, you get to a certain age and you start thinking, what's the name of that song? When they ring the golden bells for you and me. So anyway, those things are very moving to me. And I, several years ago, did get very curious about who all these people were that I didn't know who had come along before. So I've got some pictures here of signs that are from around the church, and they date to all different times from back when Moore Memorial was founded, but then decided to move west and take the property here. And so when Moore Memorial came here, they had to really, really pinch pennies. And on the first worship service here, they did have a sanctuary and a roof on it, but they didn't have windows. They didn't have any pews, and they were worshiping here in celebration of the newness and the movement forward. And they had raised this money to build what they could during the Depression. And so all of these pieces to this ultimately came together. Now, the name you're going to see on here more than any other name is Harwell. And we are very familiar with the Harwell Chapel, and there have been all manner of people in this congregation who have Harwell in their name. Guy, are there any Harwells still active here?
Next month for Emma Harwell. Emma is Johnny's daughter, Marianne's child, and her cousin Tom is not a member, but an active Bible study.
Okay, all right. Well, that's very interesting. Well, they didn't have a steeple. They didn't have a vestibule. They didn't have really anything up in the pulpit area of the church. There was nothing here but chairs, and they were folding chairs. And again, no windows. So ultimately, they dedicated the McClure, the Harwell family dedicated a bell in the steeple, and the steeple got built up there to house this bell. And again, look at the year, 1939. The Depression was still kind of coming out of it, but it was still very, very much there. And so here's another one that you see up on the front on the pedestal that holds up the baptismal font. And here this family paid for the chancel to be finished out, and it's been kind of gone through a few iterations in my lifetime, and probably in some of your lifetimes too. We've moved things around a bit up there. But Frances Butterworth Wilson, her daughters dedicated this in the memory of her, and she was just one of these many women who were doing all manner of things for this congregation. I mean, the women were basically at Moore Memorial and here as well. They were the fundraisers. You know, they made aprons and sold aprons. They made cookbooks and sold cookbooks. But they were always doing things to raise money on behalf of the congregation. So here we have another Butterworth, Miss Leela Butterworth, and she there was a big event to dedicate the baptismal font the font itself in her name. And so this was done in her memory. And, you know, if you have a case of insomnia and you have a public library card so that you can check out books at the library, you can go on their website and get newspapers.com for free. and it will take care of you forever. It's just an addictive habit I have in looking up people's obituaries and things about War Memorial. And, you know, sometimes when I do this, it makes me so angry at the Tennessean. I know this is sinning here in church by criticizing the Tennessean, but there's nothing in it. When you take that paper, there's none of the things you used to see. They used to run the names of the sermons on Friday or Saturday for every church in town, if they would send the information in. So Moore Memorial and Westminster were in there every Sunday, but none of these church affairs are really covered anymore in our newspaper. So here we've got this bell in the sanctuary, and then we get another bell. And this is J. Hunter Orr, and he was in the wholesale food business. And he and his wife were very active members of this congregation. And so another bell was added up into the chancel in memory of both of them by their children. Now, this man was one of the pastors of Westminster, William Murdoch McLeod, and he was much loved in the church and the community. He had a lot to do with this church growing after it moved out here, and he was really a very active man in the community of Nashville. He was speaking at the Rotary Club and this and that and the other. He was doing all manner of things in the community as well. And so then you go into the Harwell Chapel, and that's where there's a lot of names there that are all Harwells. Now, I want you to look at the age of Goodrum Harwell. He was 18 years old. He was a senior at MBA, and something happened and he died. He was in sports. He was one of the most popular young men in Nashville, and he died. And so his death really was the catalyst for building that chapel as a memorial to him here at Westminster. And the whole Harwell family, you go back, and I guess the last one I really remember were Rob and Beth now lives in North Carolina, right? So, and I have communicated with her a time or two, and then she's found something and sent me an envelope of stuff. So anyway, she's over in North Carolina. So now we've got this children's building, and this is, you know, you look at this, and I've always wanted somebody who has drafting skills to do some maps for me that would start out with just the sanctuary, and then it would be kind of a PowerPoint where then you would lay on the steeple and the chancel and the narthex, and then you would add all these things on, and you can see how this church has grown. And I mean, even in the time that we've been in this church, we've had 2 or 3 big renovations, this being one for sure right here. You know, I don't think I have a picture of this in my PowerPoint, but John and Norma Rich were very, very active and faithful members of this church, and she was particularly active. She was head of the women of the church. She was on the board of the Louisville Seminary. She was very, very active here in the church. And so they built what was going to be a big fellowship hall and a gym, because our basketball team, which the church had to go to Martha O'Brien. No, not Martha O'Brien. The orphan Monroe Harding, which was an orphanage at that time. They had to go over there to practice for their basketball game. So the Riches gave this building, but this building was kind of a cavern because the sound was so bad, because it started down there where the cafe is, and there was nothing here. This was the ceiling of that, and so the noise level here was pretty unbelievable. But they gave the money for the original thing, and then after Donovan came, there was a move afoot to really expand this. and make it more usable. And so that was when the cafe was created for the youth program. And then this became the fellowship hall, and you were able to add the overlook room and some other things during that renovation. Yes. In, are you talking about when the organ, yeah, that's bad. That's bad. Yeah, I honestly have no memory of that. Kathy, do you remember that? Your children are younger than mine, I think. But you remember it, Dick? The great, yeah. And you know, that house sat pretty much right here, kind of where the parking lot is. And this family sold off the front part of their lot, something that everybody in our neighborhood is cringing about, other people taking this action in our neighborhood. But nonetheless, they sold it to Moore Memorial, and the church was here. But then when the family, this was built by the Wilson's daughter, and her last name was Gray, and they had a lovely, beautiful house back there. Ridley Wills has a picture of it in one of his books. And there was a fire. A lot of people have talked about this that were in that worship service, because this had Sunday school classes back there and a lot of other things. And you know, they started see smoke out there. And so, you know, here come the fire trucks. Luckily, there's the fire hall across the street. And anyway, that created a big kind of brouhaha. And then if you go through the session minutes, that some of the people in the session thought the church ought to spend the money to rehab it. And other people said, tear it down, tear it down. It's too expensive to rehab it. But there were a lot of things that went on back there. I mean, Elizabeth, your parents had their wedding reception back there. And your mother told me that, you know, she and her mother were over here the day of the wedding, or the day before the wedding, polishing the silver and the things over there to get the place looking good for her Becky Wright's wedding. And so then there's some lovely, lovely pictures of your mother back in the day when the newspaper had pictures of brides in there. So then they had a lot of pictures of your mom. She was and still is a beautiful woman. So that house burned down, and the church voted to take it down and put up the parking lot. And yeah, this has been kind of an expansion going on. Yes. It did not belong to a member. No, there's a lot of Wilsons in this, but it was not that family. And the Wilsons owned all of that property. They had a huge estate, a huge house. I think this is in Ridley's book too, that is basically between Wilson, the street over here outside the church, all the way down to where I-440 is. They had all of that property that's now Richland Central. They had the huge house on that piece of property as well. And he had, I'm not sure quite what his business was, but Mr. Gray, who married their daughter, he was Guilford Dudley the first partner in the Gray and Dudley hardware store. And, you know, hardware and wholesale were very big in Nashville up until about 1960 or 70. I mean, there were furniture stores that were warehouses for furniture companies down on Second Avenue, and you know, things that were going to be shipped out to other parts of the South. And so the things have changed a lot here. Now, Charlotte Persinger, I never met her. Dick, do you ever know her? She came here as the Christian education director. She had, all ages and all grades. She was a single woman. She was much, much loved, but she had an old car that really was a clunker. And she was going to Montreat and here and there. She had a sister, I think, that lived in Knoxville. And she was going in her old beat up car. And so the session magnanimously bought her a car. And wouldn't you know it, she had a car wreck and was killed. And she and Sally Boone were very close friends, and they called her Perky. Everybody in this congregation loved her. And so this was just absolutely stunning that she had gotten killed in this car that the church had bought her. But she was much loved. And so when, not this building, but the one over there, the next one in between, was the children's building that was built. They put this plaque up to make sure that she was remembered as being such a fine Christian educator, and she had a special interest in children. And, along the way, we started the first kindergarten the first Protestant kindergarten in Nashville, the Westminster kindergarten. Now, there's a member of the church here who every time I say Westminster kindergarten, I get chastised that it was never a kindergarten. But my children went to school there, and probably everybody else is in this room did too at some point in their childhood. And so this building, it was named for her. And, I've been around a while, and I keep thinking about these rooms that I can't find anymore. And there was a room over there somewhere that was a great big room where the kindergarten had their music classes. And so Maddie Moore Barr was the kindergarten music person, but for the life of me, I can't remember where that was. And I hadn't. John Thorpe may be about the only one that knows where that is. Maybe your mother does. I don't know, but there was a big room over there. Yes. She died. Let me get my notes here. Oh, 1964. Okay, got it. Yeah. 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 So they dedicated it before she died, it looks like. Yeah. But anyway, I was not able to really find much of a good story about her in the paper. So, but I do know that she was very, very much loved. Now, Barbara Jones is a person I'm sure many of you remember. She's Greg Jones' mother, Jordan Jones' mother. And they moved here from Philadelphia, and almost immediately she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she went through treatment and getting better, and then it would come back with a vengeance. And she ultimately died of breast cancer. So her family really kind of got this going. They lived in Louisiana, and they gave a substantial contribution to Westminster to fix up what the money was originally given for, was to fix up the area down there where Good Pasture Hall is for the youth. And now the Good Sam's class was still having Sunday school in that big room where the fellowship hall used to be. And all of the other part was going to be renovated for the youth and things for them to do. So her death was not expected, but it was something that the whole church grieved about. And then her husband, Greg, later remarried Aunt Kathy Oliver, who was a widow, and they were down on the beach in Florida, probably 25 years ago, maybe, and there were warnings on the beach that there was going to be a bad tide. And her husband, Barbara's husband, swam out into that water and drowned. I mean, those children, it was really very difficult. Jordan is a friend of my daughter's, and it was very, very difficult for them to take all of that in. Okay, so here we go. We also had the Westminster School, which was this wing over here was built in one of our financial campaigns primarily for them. When we joined the church, the first time we came, the class was meeting upstairs where the choir rooms are now. And, the Sunday school class that we were attending was up there in that room. And so the Westminster School kind of took over that whole part of the building. And the Lydian Bible class had put up they had built a prayer room next to the church offices, which were over here where the Westminster, this hall over here where the elementary classes still are meeting. And so it was the school grew so much that was part of the reason we needed Sunday school space, but we also were accommodating the Westminster School. And it really reached so many people. There are so many testimonials of people, women, mothers, coming up here from, let's just say, Birmingham, because their child had a learning disability, not a physical disability, but a learning disability. And so this school was dealing with students with dyslexia and all manner of things. But once again, it was over here, and then it just started bursting at the seams. And so this is when the Ingram family gave the money and the property to build Curry Ingram Academy, which is out on Murray Lane in Williamson County. And they built that school out there, and it is thriving. I mean, there are still people from all over the South who come and live temporarily here, one member of the family, so that their children can be educated there. And I talked with a woman who lived in Portland, and her Tennessee, not Oregon, and she, her husband was kind of a retired Army person. And so one of them would drive their child from Portland to here and then to Murray Lane for school, and then drive back to Port Gallatin or Portland, and then go back at the end of the day to pick the child up. And so this school is nationally known and nationally recognized. And in some ways, it's kind of a shame that we don't have something over there to acknowledge that Westminster did have a licensed kindergarten. Yes, Lochiel. Uh-huh. And it was a continuing education session for there were teachers who were there. And they were given the history of Curry England, and the first thing they said was this school came out of Westminster School. I was so, I mean, I just started. Yeah, yeah. Recognize and acknowledge that. Yeah. Yes. And this actually this session that we had gone to was they had it once a year. It was a charity cornet, something. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. Did you teach here? Upstairs? Choir room, yeah, yeah. That was where it was. And so it expanded, and it's been one of the really, I think, wonderful things that this church has done. And I think the church still tries to come up with things that are going to help people. And so the Westminster Home Connection is a huge one of those, because, and I'm wondering when we're going to have teams going to North Carolina or Florida to help with the cleanup there, because a lot of people went down when Katrina hit Louisiana from here. Did you go, Joe? Carson was around here somewhere, and there were a lot of people from here who went down there for Katrina. And remember when the flood happened here, the Presbyterian disaster relief, or whatever they call it, asked Westminster if they could send teams from all over the country here to spend a week. Yes, you know more about this than I do. And it's still going on. And really, I think, the fact that we've got this habitat build going on all the time, we've done a lot of remarkable things here in our own community. Now, many of you know Susie Baird, and this is their oldest child who had some physical disabilities. And he died. As you see, he had a fairly short life there. And one more bell is up in the steeple in memory of this son of Susie Baird's. And her other son, Craig, is still alive and works for the state. Now, Janie Alford was an institution around here, and she was one of these women who, if only she had had a chance. She went to Hume-Fogg High School. She was very high in her class. She really wanted to go to college and become a librarian. That was her only goal in life, was to be a librarian. But then her father died, and she had to she had to go to work and support her mother and her sister. So Janie never, ever had a chance to go to college, and that was her one desire. But this woman wrote magnificent poetry, and she wrote all sorts of poems about all sorts of things. I bought from a used book place a little booklet of her poems, and they're really quite lovely. You'll see this one right here, Thanks Be to God. And when we did have the history panels out here on the wall, there was a poem about the spires of Westminster that she had written that I had put when we did those panels for the wall. But she was very active here, and she started a Sunday school class for unmarried women, women who were adults who were career women. And so she taught that class forever. She was the librarian. There was a picture of her in the old library that was over there where the expansion to the parlor now is. And she taught that class. And, those women had more fun. They would put on plays for each other, and they had costumes, and they had all manner of stories. And Janie was their teacher. And so they were very much a very tightly knit group of women in this church. So Janie had to go to a nursing home in her last years. And so our director of Christian education was Nancy Smith. Was that her name? Smith? And so the members of the class went to her, Aunt Janie, I mean, not to Janie, but to Nancy, and said, we've got to have a new teacher. Janie's going to the nursing home. She's not going to be able to teach anymore. See, the married women were in a special class. They had the Margaret Liston class. We couldn't let the unmarried women integrate the married women in those days. So it's kind of a crazy kind of situation. So nobody volunteered to teach the class. And so finally, I was over here picking up one of my kids at the kindergarten, probably Ellen, and I went into Nancy's office and I said, have you found a teacher? And she said, no. Why, do you want to do it? And I said, well, sure, I'll do it. And I got to say, the women in that class, when they saw me walk in, they were so disappointed. I mean, and they've told me this until the very last one died, Dot Sowell, who died a few years ago. But they said, you know, we took one look at you and said, well, you're not old enough to teach us. And so anyway, I have to say that those women made an impression on me like no other, because I didn't really have a lot of confidence about teaching. So I had a very difficult time trying to get a teaching job in a public or private high school. But, the name of many, many of the history teachers in schools is his first name is always Coach, or her first name is always Coach. And so since I couldn't coach the football team, I was never, ever even considered for a position. So anyway, the Millspa sisters, whom I know a lot of you knew, Kathy knew them pretty well, and they had never married. They lived with their parents. They went to college. They saved up their money. They took care of their parents. They retired from their. They became school principals eventually. They became retired, but they were still very interested in education. And they had traveled a lot together. And the Millspa sisters had saved up a lot of money. And so they gave about half of it to Peabody, which they were very grateful for educating them. And then they gave another big half here at Westminster. And Guy, I guess I should bring this up with the property committee. I think we need to put a plaque up somewhere about that, because we redid the floors in the sanctuary, didn't we? When the Millspas died, when the last one, Catherine, died. And I'll tell you one thing funny, when Ben Sparks was our interim pastor, I went out with him to serve home communion. And so we went over to the Millspas, and so Catherine, the more chatty of them, or Margaret, I can't keep them straight now. Catherine was the chatty one. And they were both sitting in these recliners, and their household helper, who they had 24-hour help by this time, met us at the front door. And so we went in, and the very first thing Catherine said when I said, this is our interim pastor. And she said, well, I'm sorry, we just have to pay for all our care now, and we can't make a big contribution to the church. She thought that we were there to collect their tithe or something. She was just immediately on the spot. But Ben Sparks still remembers that day. And so anyway, yes. Sometimes she did. Yeah. Yeah, we did. Yeah, there are a bunch of. Yeah, I don't think they're there anymore, but yeah, we sang some of them. And there's some that are there's at least one in the current hymnal we've got, but those little pamphlets that were stuck in there, are not there. At least I'm always, when I get a hymnal, wherever I sit, which is generally sort of in the same place, I always look to see who the hymnal has been dedicated in memory of. But yes, there's a lot of people that remember all of these folks here who have gone before us. And she was the whole group. So now I'm bringing in the last person, who is somebody that really is literally a saint. And this is Charlie Strobel. And he was a Catholic priest who had a church in East Nashville. And he started making sandwiches because there were so many poor people around his church. And this led to his founding of the Room in the Inn. And he has most recently, he died last year, and he started this Room in the Inn program and the Campus for Human Development. And he even, Margaret Wrinkle, who has a contract with the New York Times, she's a writer here in town, she had an op-ed piece in the New York Times specifically about Charlie. And I've asked some of my Catholic friends about Charlie, and they said, well, they're trying to get him made a saint. Canonized? Yes, canonized. That's the term. Thank you. Yeah, and they're trying to get him canonized. But he had a great funeral. He loved baseball. And so his funeral was out at the Sound Stadium. And his picture was up there. And it was absolutely the kind of funeral that he liked. So now, as it's time for us to get on to church and save our seats for the service, I hear the music is beautiful. I've got one more last thing that I want us to do. And when I was teaching the Lydian class, this is a story in Genesis, and you can go back and read it, but it explains where the Mespa benediction came from. And every Sunday in that class, at the end of class, everybody stood up and held hands and said the Mespa benediction. And so I would like for us all, as we end this, to end with this prayer. Let us pray. May the Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another. Amen. Yes. Oh, yes, I will. And I think the reason that we became members here, and they gave them good. Look into that. Yeah, because I remember.
I thought you were going to mention the popcorn king who gave the what's their names? The Blevins Garden.
Oh, yes, the Blevins Garden, but didn't they ultimately decide to go to another church?
I think their children did.
Oh, okay. I can't, yeah, but they did give them a garden. That's a good point.
Thank you, Carol. We have one more week of Carol. So see you next week.
Thank you. You're way too kind. Yeah. All right.